the imagining of a separate God who is capricious, just does whatever he wants. And so you're afraid of him like you would be afraid of an alcoholic parent. That's part of the reason why the G word is so not loved nowadays, because of that. A deeper understanding of God as the source of all cosmic law, not capricious, temperamental, being like us. So no matter what words you use, it's not quite right. But I mean, not separate, not a separate big being among beings, but the underlying source of all beings, from which all the laws of the universe manifest. That's different. This is Dharmakaya, really, or it's a different notion of God. God as unmanifest being itself, rather than being a being. So, I mean, when I was a Catholic child in catechism, they say God is a supreme being. No, God is supreme being. If he's a supreme being, then he's a bully. But if he's supreme being, he is truly transcendent. Now, that's the interesting thing, is if you read Thomas Aquinas, he is supreme being. He's not a supreme being. So it's not as though it's not in mystical literature, even of the Western Catholic Church. It's in there. It's definitely in there, but it's just not often taught with such clarity and sophistication at the popular level, even by the Catholic Church, which prides itself in education. But that's believe me, as a young kid who wanted to learn this stuff, I had to go to Buddhism. I couldn't get it from the Catholic Church as a young child. That being, God is beingness itself. Then I returned later and I went, oh, what Thomas Aquinas is saying it. What happened? Why did they, and certainly in the Eastern Orthodox Church, it's Dionysius. I mean, it's all in the mystical literature of the Orthodox Church as well. But at the popular level, God ends up becoming, a big guy, the boss, and you're listening to him that way. So it gets tricky to sort it out, and it's to recognize that the way in which we see God as a big being, just bigger than us and in control, can be a kind of it's certainly a huge limit and creates problems. It can be you have to use it very skillfully if you think that way, if you think of God as a being, because then he can be this way or that way. He can change. He can be moody, and if you read the Bible, he certainly seems that way at times in the Old Testament. He does this, then he does that. He likes this one, he doesn't like that one. All that, it just speaks of all the kind of parental issues that we had with siblings, and am I loved, am I not loved, all of that. It's also the transcendence of that paradigm is right there in the Bible as well, but it takes a lot of sophistication to get to it. Whereas in Buddhist philosophy, it's spelt out very clearly, and so in Advaita Vedanta as well, and in Kashmir Shaivism, it's very. But then let's be honest, the average Hindu is not reading Advaita philosophy either. They're, so what to say? Anyway, I think I went off on a tangent on that one, but that's it's worth saying because we're saying God so much here. I want to be clear about that.
Capriciousness of God, the being who is God.
But there's no capriciousness in being itself. There's none, zero.
Unless I interpret what's happening.
That's where
I've been good.
That's
I've been
where
good for all my life, and now I broke my leg. Now I have a heart attack. Now
exactly
my spouse dies. That's capricious. Sounds
That's exactly
capricious.
right. So that's why this understanding has to be very subtle. If you understand that we're talking about unmoving, unchanging being, and things are what they are, so to surrender to things as they are is to surrender to align yourself with reality. That's a very different thing than I trying my best to please a parent who sometimes does this and sometimes does that, and I can't figure out what he wants, and then he punishes me for no reason. All that's the distinction, and that's why people are so allergic to God concepts, and it's understandable. I mean, I went through that whole thing myself. This is what the difference between mystical theology and popular theology. And I'm not saying they're just two things. There's there's a spectrum of in that, with all kinds of admixtures there. But this is why you don't even really need the word God to do it. But I think it is entirely appropriate, actually, because of the personness in it, because of the heart and the love that is radiating from being always. And that indeed all the mystics of all the traditions, they, despite whatever theologies they were in, whether they reflect this in their language or they don't, they end up recognizing almost the identical situation.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they had to do backflips to, including Hinduism, most definitely. In other words, there's a huge gap. If you read the mythology in a literal way, it's very hard to understand Hinduism in terms of high philosophy. There's tons of myths about Hindu gods and goddesses that you go, what is going on here? It wouldn't, if you just follow it at that popular level. But then if you study, Shankara, Ramanuja, Abhimanyu, all of the mystic theologians of the what we would call theologians, I don't know, mystic philosophers, then Hinduism is pristine. Almost the same thing happened in Buddhism. Buddhism, Buddha went, okay, let's clear the decks. No, the minimal gods. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about awakening. And then just cropped up just in a few hundred years. And it's like right back to, it's not that it was ever free of the popular mythology of Hinduism entirely. Buddhism was never entirely free of it, but it was certainly, by saying we don't believe in the Vedas, it kind of cleared the deck. But then it just came right back in, because the universe is filled with spirit that is able to be related to in personal ways, and humans are very opened to that. They open through that, and they're open to it, and so it makes perfect sense to believe in God and gods, or to relate to life through God and gods. And that's not, that's not the final word. The way in which that's true transcends a changeable God. Ultimately, the ultimate God is unchanging and moving, and it's understood in all classical theology, and Catholic and Jewish and Orthodox and in Muslim. Divine simplicity is that God does not move or change. God is the unchanging ground of being. The ground of being, everything is interpreted from that. So all of the descriptions of God in the Old Testament, doing things and appearing to be capricious, that's all understood metaphorically about the unmoving, unchanging God. But from the popular level, they might hear about God being unmoving and unchanging, but really the one that does all that stuff, that's the real God. And the unmoving, changing, oh yeah, and he also doesn't change, but he's angry at this one and happy with that one, and does this, makes deals with people, and and then turns his back on this one, and it's like, so he's a personality that you have to contend with, and he's dangerous. And maybe he sent his son to save you from him because he was going to beat you so bad, but then he sent his son so he beat his son instead, take your place. So now you're okay. I mean, that kind of a God, like believing in that literal, how is he trustable? So it was scary, kind of. So, but when you go deeper, then it's not just like that. I mean, especially among the Orthodox. I mean, that kind of God is scary, and is someone you don't want to be in relationship to. But when you recognize that God is the ground of being, all you're doing is relaxing into your own ground. And that's God. And that is pure heart and pure love. And whatever resistance that you have to relaxing into your own being, the suffering that comes from resisting, that is the wrath of God. See, understood that way. As it is in Tibetan Buddhism, of all places, wrathful deities are wrathful in the sense that they're purifying the egoic nature that we have of its resistance to Dharma, or to the Dharmakaya, or to what is. So all of the hells in the Buddhist mythologies are the result of not resting in our own being. It's not some outside deities doing these, or even when they appear to be outside deities, they're inseparable from the nature of your own mind. So I don't know. Is this helpful? Is this language useful?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Great riff. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
My pleasure. Very good. Thanks, Lee.
I was inspired.
Oh, very good. All right. Thanks. That's good. Do you have anything you'd like to share, or anything to say? Or
I thought what you were saying was really interesting about you started to allude to people who understand, this is my own wording, understand God or being at a different level. So like if you literally believe and accept the Bible, for instance, and I know that you're I've watched how good you are at sort of switching gears depending on how a person receives what you're saying. So do you have any advice about how to talk to people who experience God that way?
yeah,
Some people I really love to.
want to say more?
Some people that I really love experience God that way.
Yes. That it's best not to disturb people. It's best to relate to them at the level at which they at which they already believe. It's tricky because sometimes it almost appears to be dishonest, like I'm not really speaking the whole of what I feel, but it's out of love. There's some question about, I mean, Paul in the New Testament speaks about this version of this anyway, and he says not to be a stumbling block to those who don't understand more deeply, because you don't want to shake their what is what is a refuge for them, what is sustaining them. And so I'm fine with friends and relatives who may have an image of God or an idea of God that is not in alignment with what I understand, but is comforting them and useful to them and is working for them and is the means through which God as being is blessing them, and sustaining them and giving them hope and giving them life. It's a different thing when somebody asks you, or someone's going through something and they want to know what you think. Like here in satsang as well, it's an entirely different thing. But when somebody's not particularly asking you, but they believe that in a different way, who am I to question them or to try to change their mind about anything? Yeah. So compassion is the most important factor. Love, compassion, kindness. I mean, I still take part in forums that are closed on Facebook with friends or people that I knew. I don't even, and then always, some of them are friends, but people that I knew when I was an evangelical Christian. And in that forum, I tend to be more argumentative because they do too. So I might, yeah. But then when but on that same forum, when somebody is kind to me, then I'm not challenging them on their version of what is, or what they think is, I sometimes question myself why even bother, because it's different though with family. I can say that family and loved ones. In that case, they are family and loved ones, and that's why I'm relating to them. And when they say we're praying for so and so, I'm like, I'll pray for them too. And my way of praying may be different than their way of praying, but the intention is there. And really, that's all they want anyway. They're not interested in how I pray. They just want to know that I love them, or that we both hold this person in common in love and good thought and good feeling. So it's perfect. Sure. We're praying for so-and-so. Okay, good. Okay, we will. And that's it. And they know, they don't push me. They know. I mean, that my mother went around, here's, my son has a book. So they've seen that I'm not, they know I went to India, they know all that. So it's like, don't ask, don't tell. They don't want to know about it. So it's fine. But yeah, I think kindness is really kindness, compassion. Yeah. For me, the equation, it doesn't mean better than, in the big picture, I have no idea how this works. I don't know how it works. So it's entirely possible that somebody who has what I would consider an inferior understanding philosophically is closer to God in their ignorance than I am. I have no way of judging any of that. I mean, there's enough of stories of bodhisattvas who, like, okay, well, fully and awakened bodhisattva, but this life I'm going to be born as an earthworm for the sake of earthworms. And that's so I don't know who these people are. It's like, okay, I'm going to be born among born again Christians. She decides, she's like a version of Tara. She decides she's going to be born among born again Christians so she can radiate compassion and love that will affect them and some other. I don't know. So what do I know? It might be part of her mission, to not remember who she is for that life, but she's actually still radiating bodhicitta the entire time, like full on, and blessing people. I've done arrogance enough in this life to know that it's not a good way to go. I have many embarrassing stories of things that I said and did. I know it's better to just assume that you don't know. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks, Krishna.